On March 30th, 1944, a German intelligence officer delivered an assessment that would seal the fate of 400,000 men. General Major Reinhard Gehlen, Chief of Foreign Armies East, stood before the German High Command with reconnaissance photographs and agent reports spread across the conference table. His prediction was clear. The Soviets would strike south, toward the Balkans, toward Germany's last accessible oil fields. Hitler agreed. Panzer divisions shifted southward. The center of the German line was stripped of mobile reserves. Gehlen was wrong. What followed was the single greatest military catastrophe in German history. In just 5 weeks, 28 divisions would be annihilated. An entire army group would cease to exist. And the Red Army would advance 300 miles, farther in one summer than the Western Allies would travel from Normandy to the Rhine. This is the story of Operation Bagration and the intelligence failure that made it possible. If you're interested in how wars are actually decided by logistics, math, and doctrine, subscribe now, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for more in-depth World War analysis. Let's continue. Gehlen's prediction shaped German strategic dispositions for 7 critical weeks. On May 20th, Hitler approved the transfer of LVI Panzer Corps from Army Group Center to Army Group North Ukraine. The corps comprised 2 experienced formations, the 4th and 5th Panzer Divisions, mechanized units representing substantial striking power. Their departure stripped the central front of critical mobile reserves at the precise moment Soviet planning staffs finalized their offensive. The intelligence failure stemmed from a fundamental methodological flaw. Gehlen's analysts weighted German strategic priorities into their assessments of Soviet intentions. This mirror imaging assumed the Red Army operated under the same constraints that paralyzed Wehrmacht operations: fuel, industrial capacity, agricultural production. The analysis discounted something far more important to Stalin: the symbolic and strategic value of Belorussia, where German forces had occupied Soviet territory since 1941. Army Group Center's defensive posture reflected this miscalculation. Stretched across 100 kilometers of front, from Vitebsk to the Pripyat marshes, the formation deployed 38 divisions. Many were under strength. Several were designated as static defensive units, lacking mobile transport entirely. The transfer of LVI Panzer Corps reduced the Army Group's armored reserve to fragments. Individual tank battalions attached to infantry corps, incapable of coordinated counterattacks against operational-level penetrations. General Hans Jordan, commanding the 9th Army, recognized the vulnerability. His army held positions along the Dnieper and Berezina rivers, with divisions spread across excessive frontages, lacking depth for defense in multiple echelons. But Jordan's units operated under Hitler's Standing Fortress Directive, static defense of designated cities regardless of encirclement risk. The combination of extended frontages, immobile reserves, and inflexible defensive doctrine created conditions for catastrophic breakthrough. By mid-May, as LVI Panzer Corps relocated southward, Soviet forces completed assembly for the largest offensive operation of 1944, directed against the weakened center of the German Eastern Front. In Moscow, the Stavka apparatus examined 2 German positions across 900 kilometers of front. To the north, the Belarusian sector bulged westward, a salient anchored by 4 armies stretched across swampland and pine forests. To the south, the Ukrainian flank sat astride the approaches to Lvov, recently reinforced with the armored divisions stripped from the center. Between these sectors lay the fulcrum of Soviet planning, a coordinated offensive designed to strike both simultaneously, forcing Wehrmacht planners into an impossible calculus. The deception architecture began with German assumptions. Foreign Armies East predicted the main Soviet effort would target the southern wing. Hitler accepted this assessment, so the Soviets fed it. Dummy formations proliferated opposite the Ukrainian flank. Radio traffic sustained German expectations. Meanwhile, the real concentration occurred opposite Minsk and Vitebsk. Against the German overextension, Soviet planners massed 4 fronts: 1st Baltic, 3rd Belarusian, 2nd Belarusian, and 1st Belarusian. The force ratio in the target sectors approached 6-1 in infantry, 10-1 in armor. Concealment efforts hid this concentration absolutely. Units moved only at night. Radio discipline remained total. The operational architecture demanded precise timing. The northern attack must draw German reserves toward Belorussia before the southern offensive began. Stavka designated June 22nd, the 3rd anniversary of Barbarossa, as the launch date for the Belarusian operation. The Lvov-Sandomierz operation would commence days later, exploiting the confusion as German headquarters scrambled to contain simultaneous breakthroughs. The two-front trap required German commanders to choose: reinforce the collapsing center or defend the intact southern wing. Either decision led to catastrophic weakness somewhere along the line. On the night of June 19, 1944, 3 years of preparation detonated across Belorussia. Partisan demolition teams, organized, equipped, and coordinated through radio links to Soviet command, placed explosive charges on 10,500 separate points along the railroad network, threading through Wehrmacht-held territory. The charges fired in coordinated waves. Rail lines buckled, switch mechanisms shattered, bridge timbers collapsed into rivers. Within hours, the entire transportation infrastructure west of Minsk entered a state of paralysis. The timing reflected operational precision rather than random sabotage. These demolitions struck 3 days before the main assault, calculated to create maximum disruption during the exact window when Army Group Center would require rapid movement of reserves. The scale exceeded anything previously attempted in the Partisan War. Each destroyed rail section required repair crews, materials, and security detachments. The Wehrmacht possessed neither sufficient repair capacity nor the manpower to guard every kilometer of track. Partisan units, numbering over 140,000 fighters in Belorussia alone, could strike repaired sections faster than German engineers could restore them. For commanders attempting to shift reserves, the paralysis imposed catastrophic delays. Units ordered to threatened positions found themselves immobilized in rail yards or forced onto roads inadequate for heavy equipment. The few functioning rail lines became congestion points, vulnerable to Soviet air interdiction. 3 days remained before reconnaissance operations would begin probing German defenses. Those 3 days would pass with Wehrmacht reserves trapped behind severed rail lines, unable to reinforce positions already weakened by months of transfers southward. At 04:00 hours on June 22, 1944, 3 years to the hour after Operation Barbarossa, Soviet artillery preparation shattered the pre-dawn silence along the 3rd Panzer Army's front. The 6th Guards Army and 43rd Army commenced reconnaissance in force, probing German defensive positions with battalion-strength infantry formations backed by artillery concentrations. German forward observers reported ground tremors from Katyusha rocket barrages before communication lines severed. The main offensive erupted 24 hours later. On June 23rd, Soviet forces unleashed the full weight of their operational preparation. The breakthrough mechanics followed Soviet deep battle doctrine. Initial artillery preparation lasting 90 minutes, followed by combined arms assault teams spearheaded by T-34-85 medium tanks. The 85mm main guns engaged German defensive positions at ranges where Wehrmacht anti-tank weapons proved ineffective. The 252nd Infantry Division, positioned within 9th Army Corps sector, disintegrated under the assault. Divisional strongpoints, designed for all-around defense per Hitler's fortress doctrine, became isolated as Soviet penetrations bypassed them. Without mobile reserves, German commanders possessed no counter-penetration capability. IL-2 Sturmovik ground attack aircraft, operating in regimental strength formations, devastated German attempts to shift reserves laterally. The armored engine cowlings and cockpit protection of these aircraft negated light flak defenses. German 80mm batteries, the only reliable defense against Soviet armor, found themselves targeted by pre-registered artillery strikes. By nightfall on June 23rd, the front had shattered across a 140-kilometer frontage. Soviet penetrations reached depths of 12 to 15 kilometers in multiple sectors. The defensive architecture that Army Group Center had constructed since 1943 proved incapable of containing an offensive executed with this concentration of force. By the morning of June 24th, the tactical map at WWII Army Corps headquarters revealed nightmare geometry. Soviet forces advancing from the 1st Baltic and 3rd Belarusian fronts had driven twin penetrations north and south of Vitebsk, their spearheads now curving westward, behind the city's defenders. The 4th Luftwaffe Field Division and 206th Infantry Division, roughly 35,000 men, occupied a shrinking perimeter measuring barely 15 kilometers across. The pocket had closed. Inside the encirclement, ammunition stocks dropped below critical thresholds. Artillery batteries rationed shells to 10 rounds per gun per day. The Luftwaffe promised air resupply, but cloudy weather grounded most transport aircraft. At 3rd Panzer Army headquarters, staff officers prepared withdrawal orders. The tactical logic appeared. Irrefutable. Lessee Army Corps must break out immediately, while a narrow corridor might still be forced open. The withdrawal order never arrived. Field Marshal Ernst Busch, commanding Army Group Center, vetoed the evacuation. His reasoning centered not on tactical calculation, but institutional prestige. Vitebsk will be held, he signaled. The Führer has designated it a fortified place. Withdrawal would damage German credibility. Hitler's fortress doctrine, which demanded static defense of symbolically important cities, regardless of operational reality, overrode frontline judgment. At 05 hours on June 26th, the 3rd Army Corps launched its breakout attempt. 5 divisions, starved of supplies and critically low on ammunition, drove westward into Soviet 39th Army positions. Infantry companies advanced with soldiers carrying fewer than 30 rounds per rifle. When KV-1 heavy tanks appeared along the breakout corridor, German forces lacked the concentrated firepower to penetrate their 75 mm frontal armor. By nightfall, the breakout had collapsed. On June 27th, the 3rd Army Corps surrendered. 20,000 German soldiers entered Soviet captivity. 5 divisions ceased to exist. Field Marshal Busch's assertion that Vitebsk's loss would cause the world to sit up and take notice proved prophetic, though not in the manner he intended. 200 kilometers south, the 9th Army's position at Bobruisk deteriorated through the morning of June 26th. Panzer Corps occupied defensive positions along the eastern approaches to the city. Behind them, the Berezina River flowed north to south, crossed by 3 bridges that represented the only viable withdrawal routes westward. Ammunition stocks stood at 40%. Fuel reserves allowed perhaps 60 kilometers of movement. From the north, Soviet 9th Tank Corps advanced in 2 columns. The lead elements bypassed German strongpoints, driving toward the river crossings rather than engaging prepared positions. At 09 hour, forward reconnaissance reached the western bank of the Berezina, 8 kilometers behind the main German defensive line. The encirclement geometry became clear by midday. Soviet forces controlled the bridges. Encirclement. Panzer Corps, still facing eastward in defensive positions, found itself cut off from rearward communications. The corps occupied a pocket measuring roughly 15 kilometers east to west, bounded by the Berezina to the west and advancing Soviet rifle divisions to the east. German engineers attempted to destroy the Berezina bridges to deny them to Soviet exploitation forces. 3 detonation attempts failed due to partisan sabotage of electrical firing systems. The final span collapsed at 17:30, under the weight of vehicles attempting simultaneous crossing from both directions. 70,000 men of XXXXXXX Panzer Corps now occupied an enclosed pocket east of an impassable river. The Bobruisk encirclement was complete. June 27, 1944. The roar arrives. First, 400 aircraft of the Soviet 16th Air Army, massed formations of Il-2 Sturmovix and P-2 dive bombers, converge on coordinates southeast of Bobruisk. Below them, XX Panzer Corps writhes in a shrinking perimeter. 70,000 men compressed into killing range. The first wave drops incendiaries, the second, high explosive, the third targets anything still moving. Marshal Georgy Zhukov observes from a forward command post as the attack develops. The systematic destruction unfolds with industrial precision. Every road, every tree line, every potential rally point receives attention. Smoke columns merge into a single black pillar visible for 40 kilometers. When the bombers depart after 6 hours, 10,000 German soldiers lie dead in the cauldron. Another 6,000, concussed and deafened, surrender to Red Army rifle divisions advancing through the debris field. 90 kilometers north, the same day, Orsha falls. The Exim 7th Army Corps evacuates what remains. The 78th Assault Division and Tiger Tank Battalion 501 withdraw westward to escape their own entrapment. The mathematics compound beyond comprehension. Vitebsk, 20,000 prisoners, 5 divisions erased. Bobruisk, 16,000 casualties from one day's fighting. Orsha, the hinge position abandoned. In 6 days, Army Group Center has lost 130,000 men, and the operational coherence that held the Central Front stable for 2 years. Field Marshal Walter Model steps into Army Group Center headquarters on June 28th. Hitler's troubleshooter scans situation maps, documenting systematic collapse. Red arrows pierce German defensive lines from 4 directions. Staff officers brief him on formations that no longer exist. T-Corps surrendered at Vitebsk the previous day. 5 divisions erased from the order of battle. Fortress Orsha has fallen. Model focuses on the Bobruisk pocket, where 70,000 troops remain encircled. Hitler's authorization to abandon the city arrives this same day, but the approval comes after Soviet's 16th Air Army has already executed its massive bombing raid 24 hours earlier. The fireman inherits a command where permission to retreat arrives after the formations requesting it have been destroyed. On June 29th, the 20th Panzer Division begins its breakout toward Osipovichi. At the head of the column rolls an anomaly, a captured JS-2 heavy tank, its 122 mm main gun and sloped armor intact. The Germans have christened it Stalin's tank. The JS-2's distinctive silhouette reads as friendly to Soviet reconnaissance units. The 46-ton steel deception advances unmolested through the first screening positions, but time has run out. The 5th Guards Tank Army drives through the left flank of the German 4th Army, advancing toward the Berezina river crossings. The twin Soviet objectives, the Berezina Bridge and crossing sites near Cernjavka, lie directly across the German withdrawal route. Models break out. Operation has become a race. German forces must reach the Berezina before Soviet armor severs their last avenue of retreat. At 06 hours on June 30th, the lead elements of 5th Guards Tank Army reached the Berezina River at Cernjavka. T-34-85 medium tanks ground to a halt on the eastern bank. Commanders emerged from turret hatches, scanning the opposite shore. Behind them, tracked vehicles stretched back 3 kilometers, a steel artery that had just severed the 4th Army's last viable withdrawal route westward. The arrival completed a pincer movement 6 days in the making. The German formations now trapped between this river position and advancing Soviet forces from the east comprised 20th Army Corps and Ex-Senztuangis Panzer Corps, approximately 100,000 personnel caught in a shrinking pocket east of Minsk. Model faced a tactical dilemma with no favorable solution. The 9th Army received orders to assume defensive command of Fortress Minsk, organizing Group Lindig from whatever rear echelon units could be scraped together. This redeployment stripped potential relief forces from the encirclement, forming 30 kilometers to the east. By July 1st, the Soviet encirclement achieved total closure. The 4th Army's remaining combat formations occupied a shrinking perimeter. Soviet artillery registered ranges on every approach route. T-34s established blocking positions along the river's entire length. At 05:40 hours on July 1st, the 12th Panzer Division punched eastward through devastated terrain between Osipovichi and Malinovka. Panzer Grenadier Regiment 25 formed the armored spearhead, Panthers and Panzer IVs navigating shell-cratered roads. Their mission, extract survivors from the Bobruisk pocket before Soviet forces sealed the corridor permanently. The link-up at Malinovka occurred mid-morning. Exhausted remnants of XXI's Panzer Corps, men who had survived the catastrophic air bombardment, staggered toward the German relief column. 25,000. Survivors from an original force of 70,000. The rest were dead, captured, or scattered. It was partial salvation. But east of Minsk, the sealed Fourth Army pocket still contained over 100,000 soldiers, and no relief was coming for them. On July 3rd, the capital of Belarusia fell. Lead elements of 2nd Guards Tank Corps, JS-122 heavy tanks mounting 122mm guns capable of penetrating any German armor at combat range, drove into Minsk's outskirts at 8 hours. Group Lindig, the ad hoc defensive force, collapsed within hours. Minsk sat at the intersection of 6 major rail lines and 3 primary highway networks. Its loss severed the logistics node sustaining German forces across a 300-kilometer front. That same day, the commanders of 15 doomed divisions gathered inside the cauldron east of the city. Tuisin, Army Corps and ex-Tamstanstansin's Panzer Corps senior officers convened in what became the Fourth Army's final operational conference. The mathematics were inescapable. Over 100,000 men compressed into shrinking terrain, Soviet armor controlling every exit route, ammunition stocks measured in hours rather than days. The conference produced no unified breakout. The trapped formations lacked the fuel, ammunition, and cohesion required for organized mass movement. Some units attempted individual escapes. Most remained in place as the killing ground contracted. On July 4th, the 3rd Panzer Army received authorization to withdraw to fortified positions constructed during the First World War, 30 years prior. The German defensive line contracted to trenches dug by an earlier generation. Inside the sealed perimeter, starvation became the dominant tactical factor. Supply drops had ceased. Soviet artillery maintained constant pressure. On July 8th, Lieutenant General Vincenz Möller, commanding what remained of the Army Corps, met Soviet representatives of the 50th Army at the Petich River. The formal surrender transferred approximately 35,000 survivors into captivity. Möller's assessment contained no military euphemism. We were forced to surrender because we had nothing more to eat. 15 divisions, the administrative structure of an entire field army, deleted from the German order of battle within 5 days. The survivors marched east into captivity. The Fourth Army vanished from Wehrmacht records. By the first week of July 1944, Army Group Center had ceased to exist as a coherent military force. The casualty figures tell the story. In just over 2 weeks, 400,000 men were killed, wounded, or captured. 28 divisions were annihilated. The Red Army advanced 300 miles, farther than the Western Allies would travel from Normandy to the Rhine in the same period. General Erhard Raus observed that the Supreme Command has lost all concept for time and space and their relationship with military strength. 20,000 prisoners at Vitebsk, 70,000 trapped at Bobruisk, 100,000 sealed east of Minsk. These figures validated his assessment, but the destruction was not yet complete. On July 13th, as German formations in Belarusia disintegrated into scattered remnants, Marshal Ivan Konev unleashed the First Ukrainian Front against Army Group North Ukraine. The Lvov-Sandomierz offensive opened with crushing force, and another pocket was about to close. At Brody, 85,000 German soldiers would be encircled. Among them, the 14th Waffen Grenadier Division, 12,000 Ukrainian volunteers who had no idea that Soviet armor had already penetrated 15 kilometers behind their lines. That story, in Part 2. If you found this breakdown valuable, subscribe and hit the bell for Part 2, where we cover the Brody Pocket and the final destruction of German forces in Ukraine. The material asymmetry that decided the Eastern Front, American trucks versus German horses, comes into sharp focus. Until then.